In the last video in my Extron series, we talked about the touch panel that I use to control my entire retro setup. And I mentioned that you can use this in order to control a mister. That way you can change cores when you change the input, and it's as if you're switching to a console that you don't actually own. In order to do this, you're going to need a few pieces of hardware and a few pieces of software. So as far as the hardware is concerned, you'll need a USB to serial cable. You'll need a regular serial cable as well, which you're going to actually cut and strip the wires off of. So you're going to take this regular serial cable, and whichever end is on your USB to serial adapter, you're going to cut off. So if it's a USB to male serial cable, you will cut the male end off, and if it's a USB to female, you will cut the female end off. That way you have the other end where you can connect that USB to serial cable in order to bridge this over. Then you're going to get a Phoenix adapter that we talked about in that previous video and wire it up for a serial connection. So you'll take the bare wire end of your serial cable, and you will take your multimeter and hold it onto all these wires and figure out which pins they go to. There are many pinouts of serial connectors on the internet, and you'll just hold it to one end of this to identify all the cables. And once you get the RX, TX, and ground, you can shove those cables into the Phoenix connector, screw it down with the built-in screws, and you're good to go. There's no soldering necessary for this. Then you can take this cable and your USB to serial cable and connect them together, and that way you have essentially a USB to Extron cable. That's everything as far as the hardware is concerned. For the software, you'll need PuTTY in order to SSH into the mister. You'll need FileZilla in order to send the Python file over that we're going to execute. And you'll need a text editor in order to edit that Python file, because we're actually going to customize it depending on what we want to do with our cores. The first thing you'll want to do is get your mister hooked up with the serial cable into your 505, and just take note of which serial port you're plugging it into, because you'll need to know that for later. With the mister plugged in to the serial port, we'll go ahead and turn it on, and let's get started with the actual mister side of things. Alright, so here we are on the mister itself, and we only need to be on here right now just to find the IP address. So I'll go ahead and hit my home button on my controller, go over to the left, and you can see here my IP is 10.0.0.69, which we will need for both PuTTY and for the FileZilla client. We have our IP address now, so we can go ahead and start working on the PC. First, I have the extron.py Python file that I'll upload somewhere for you. And you can download this, right-click it, and open it up in your text editor. So you can use Notepad for this, but I suggest using Notepad++ because it gives you a better idea of like the different lines that are going on. It color codes things for you so you know what's going on, and it just makes things a little easier. Here we are in the Python file. The important part of this is this config command to core string right here. So this has a few different sections, basically. On the left side here, in quotes, you'll see the name of the core. Now, this is not the actual name of the core. You can put any name that you want here, but just make it something that you'll remember for what core you're putting in. You can use this for any core, so it can be for consoles, it can be for arcade, whatever you want to put in here. Just name it something that you'll remember later. These are the names that you're going to use as a command that you send over serial. So if I send NES over serial, it's going to open the core that is located at media, fat, console, NES underscore, and then the date code. This is where the complication comes in. I'm going to put this file on, and some of these cores by default may not work for you. You're probably going to need to come in here and change these date codes. This is because every time you run update all or update and it updates these cores for you, the newer core updates are going to have a different date code, and that's what we're referencing right here. If someone knows how to write a script that'll pull these automatically and then edit this Python file, that would be awesome. I'm just not a programmer, so I have no idea how to do that. But it is definitely something that is possible in the future. So here we have all of my consoles. Now, like I said, we need to make sure that these date codes match. So we're also going to go ahead and use FileZilla to FTP into the mister that's already turned on and see what it's actually got on it. So in order to connect to my Mister through FTP, I need to put the IP address into this host section right at the top, 10.0.0.69. I need to enter the username, which is root, and the password, which is just the number 1. I'll do quick connect. We need to go up a directory into the media folder. FAT is our SD card. And then all of these with an underscore in the beginning of them are your cores. So you can use any of these cores, you can use any of these .rbf files. It doesn't have to be a console, so if you had a Mr. Laggy, one of these little guys right here, you could run the Mr. Laggy program if you needed to do a latency test for some reason. But realistically, you're probably just going to use the console's computers and maybe arcade cores. So let's go into the console folder. I've got all my consoles listed here. I can go ahead and add as many of these as I want to this. You're not restricted to the ones that are already in this list. I think some of these I added myself from the original file that I got. Let's just make sure this GBA one says 1211 is the last part. So I'll go to the GBA 1211. Let's check the Super Nintendo, which is 1204 at the end. 1204. So we would just go through and make sure all these are correct. If we want to add a new one, we can add another string here. And let's add, what console do we want to add? We can just pick a random one. TurboGrafx isn't added yet. Let's add the TurboGrafx. So I will just say TG16. That's what I'm going to put there. In quotes, I'll do a colon, space, another quote, and then we need to put the directory to that file. Now all the console cores are in the same first part of the directory. It's going to be media fat underscore console, so you can just copy that from another one. If it was an arcade core, you would just change the word console to arcade and then put the core in there. We'll do another console core slash, and then we need the name of the TurboGrafx core, so we'll just copy that, paste it in here, do an end quote, and then a comma. And there we go. Now we have that added. And let's add an arcade core just for good measure. So one of my favorite arcade games is Galaga. Actually, probably my favorite arcade game, I would say. Let's add Galaga in here. We're going to copy the name here. Oh, you know what? I should probably put in the rest of the code. We'll copy this string from up here. I need to interrupt here from the future. This Galaga game that I'm putting in here has spaces in the name, and that will not work. You need to remove the spaces from the name of the actual file on your SD card, and also from the Python file you're editing here. So you'll go to the SD card, rename the game if it has spaces in it, with underscores or just no spaces or underscores at all, and then do the same with the Python file. Otherwise, the script will not work. Change the word console to arcade, quote, and a comma. And then we can hit Control S to save that. So now we have all of our consoles and cores and software listed over here. We are pretty much done editing this. This default serial port should be correct. It should be the only serial port or serial device you have plugged into your Mister. So this should all be fine over here. Right now, we just want to go back into the root folder. This is the default. This is where you're going to go right when you log in for the first time. And I'm going to drag and drop my extron.py file just into this root file. And that's all we need to do with SSH. We're done now. Closing out FileZilla, we can go into PuTTY and type in the IP address again. We can leave all of these settings to the default and click open. And here we go. We have a terminal that we can work off of. Let me go ahead and zoom in on this. And here is the terminal. So again, root, password is 1, and we're inside. We're already in the folder where we put that extron.py file. You can see it right here. We have to go ahead and run a series of commands, and I have those listed over here. Let me get those pulled up. The first command that we're going to run is going to download a file for us that we need to install so that we can run the Python file itself. We're going to run this command right here, and now it's completed. If we run that directory command again, we should see these Python files here. It actually downloaded two files for us, getpip.py and py.1. I don't know why this is the case, but we actually need to run this .1 file. So what we're going to type here is python get pip.py.1. Hit enter. It's going to go ahead and run. You might see the lights on your mister flashing for the read and writes going on. Once you see the /root # show up here, we know that we are done with the command. It's finished running and doing all of that. It does take a few minutes. Now that we have the pip command, we can use that to install the PySerial package. So we're going to run pip install PySerial. Enter. That one's a lot faster to complete. Now we have everything done here. So there's a few things that we can do. We could run that Python file that we just finished, but if we close out of the putty session, it's going to close the script from running. So as long as putty's open, we'll be able to use the commands, but the second that we close it, we're pretty much screwed. You can't send any commands anymore. So what we need to do is run the command tmux, hit enter. It's going to bring us into a new terminal file where we can then run python3 space extron.py. We can run that because we put that in the root folder, and you can see on the left side, it's telling us we're inside that root folder. So now I'm going to hit enter. Oh, I got to type Python correctly. That would help. There we go. And now it says it's going to listen for RS-232 commands. Now I can hold the control key and press B as in Bravo, and let go of the control key and just press the letter D as in Delta. And now it brings us back. We're detached from session 0, but that is still listening on the serial port. So we can go ahead and close out of putty now. The mister should now be listening on that serial port for commands, but before we do any programming with the extron, we want to make sure that the mister is actually listening on that port and accepting the commands properly. So in order to do this, I'll have a link down in the description for a URL that you can put into your web browser in order to tell the extron 505 to send a serial command. So I'm going to paste that into my browser. And this is the command right here. We have the IP address of my 505. That's going to be different for you. So put in the IP address of that controller. W07RS, that's the serial port. So we'll change the 07 to match whichever serial port you're in. So if you're in port 2, it's going to be 02, etc. I'm in port 7 right now. And then the rest of this %7C, and then a line. Everything after the line is what is going to be sent to the mister. And remember, the only thing we need to send to take these commands in is just the name of the core that we put in quotes earlier. Right now you can see my mister at the top corner. It's just sitting there on the main screen. There's no core loaded. Let's send the NES command. Why didn't that work? I copied the wrong command in. Let's put the right command in and then hit enter. It's still not working. What the hell? And there we go. I'm not sure what went wrong. I had to run the command back in tmux again. I think I closed out of it a little too early. So I just gave it like 3 or 4 seconds to run the script and then went and closed out of tmux and closed out of putty. And now my commands are all working. So you saw that I hit enter on this command and it moved to the Super Nintendo core. And I will just delete the part here. We can put in NES. It should go ahead and you see the mister switches over. So with this in mind, we now have all of the parts we need to make our touch panel control the mister. Let's go ahead and program one of our buttons in order to do this. Once we program one button, you'll know how to program all of them. In order to program the new buttons in, we only need to go into the global configurator. In the last video, we set up all of our buttons for everything we wanted to do on the mister. So we'll just go ahead and open an existing project and open the one we worked on before. Here we have the project that I worked on a live stream that I did where I remade my entire touch panel after doing that initial video. And here are all my new buttons that I have. We have quite a few to choose from here. These are actually subfolders, so I'll go into one of those. And let's set up the NES and the Super NES. So if I go into these buttons, let me go ahead and delete this command here. and we'll start basically from scratch. Now you see this local touch panel action. Yours is probably not going to have that unless you're doing subfolders. This is just a command that I put in. But typically this would be blank right here, and we have all of our stuff on the left here that we need to worry about. The first thing that I want to do when I push one of these console buttons for whatever core or arcade I'm trying to load, I'm going to go ahead and switch the switcher's input to the proper MR VGA cable, or whatever cable you're using. In my case, I have this set up with the inputs, outputs, and take button like we showed before, so I'll just go ahead and set up the input as number 1 because that is the input that I'm using on the MR. The other thing we want to do when we press this take button is have it switch over to the core. If your setup is like mine and you're using inputs and outputs to do on-the-fly switching instead of using presets, this is actually good because it'll give you time for the core to load while you go ahead and press the output button and then press take. Once it pulls up, the core will already be loaded. If you use presets, that's fine as well. Just know that when it pops up, it might be black for a few seconds while the core loads on the MR. So we have this set up now where it's going to switch to input 1. I've done the same for the Super Famicom button here. The next thing we need to do is tell it to load the actual core. We'll go over to the user-defined tab here into serial port 7. That's the one that I plugged mine into. Just keep in mind which one yours is in. It's going to be different. We can open this drop-down and click on a user-defined command, and we can put NES because that's the command that we wrote in the Python file earlier. So I'll type NES. I'll drag that onto here. And you can see it says user-defined NES out of the serial port 7. And for the Super Famicom, we'll do the same thing. Now it says user-defined SNES, output serial 7. There we go. So now we have these two available to us. So it's going to select the input from input 1 out of our serial port into our switcher, and then it's going to send the command for the core to change over the other serial port. Once this is done, we can build our configuration here. We'll go ahead and send it over, and then once this is all done and everything's rebooted back up, I'll come back. Just to explain what you're looking at here, at the top left we have my MR hooked up via HDMI to my capture card, and that's just showing a Neo Geo core right now, none of the ones that we programmed. I also have my PS2 showing on the CRT via the switcher, and again, that has nothing to do with what we programmed, so both of these are just doing their own thing right now. And obviously my touchscreen is right here in the middle. So we programmed the NES button and the Super Nintendo button. Let's go ahead and go into that folder, and I'll show you what's actually going on in the background. So when I press this button here, I haven't gone to my output and clicked take yet, but you can see the MR's already switching over to the NES core. So by the time I click on my PVM and click take, the NES is already loaded. Once we have the MR already showing, now if we change cores, obviously that'll show on the CRT. So let's just go ahead and load the Super Nintendo. And technically we don't need to click anything else aside from the Super Nintendo button because the MR's already on the screen. And there you go, you can see it loaded up right on my CRT. And we can go back to the PS2 whenever we want. And we are good to go. That is how you get your MR to be programmed with all of your other Extron devices, so you can easily switch cores with just the press of a button. Then of course you can go and load whatever games you want from that point. A few things to keep in mind. When you're putting an arcade core in, if the arcade core has a space in the name, you'll need to go and edit the name of the core via FTP and take any spaces out. So you can put an underscore or a dash or whatever you want, but there cannot be any spaces. You can also just rename the cores in general. When you run update and update all, you're going to get new versions of cores, and you'll need to compare your cores with the names that are already in the file, because when a core updates, that file name changes. The file name is actually a date code for when that core was updated. Now, most cores don't update very frequently. Some of them haven't been updated in over a year because they're already stable and where they need to be, but for something like the Saturn that's getting updated pretty frequently, you're going to want to check back whenever you run that update script. If you never run the update script, obviously you'll never have to worry about this. And presumably someone much smarter than me could make a new script that pulls the names of the cores automatically for you, where it can read the front end that says the console name and then just changes the date code in that Python script. I also don't know how to make that Python script run on boot. As far as right now, you'll have to run tmux, run that script, exit it, and close out of PuTTY every time you reboot the mister whenever you want serial control. I have no idea how to make that happen. I'm sure it's very easy to do. It's just, I'm not a Linux user. So hopefully someone in the comments can figure out that as well. Now, I did not make this script. This script was made by JoeBot, who you can find on Discord, and by Joe Higgins, who you can find on Twitter in the links below. If you have any questions about the script, you can put them down in the comments. If I can't answer it, I'll ask one of the Joes to help out, and I'm sure we'll figure out whatever that question might be. Thank you to both of the Joes for helping, especially JoeBot, who has answered a billion questions I've had and gotten on Discord with me trying to get this running so that I could get this video made. And thank you to you for watching. If you have any questions again, throw them down below, and bye-bye.